Here is something that should be mathematically impossible. The United States housing market just posted its lowest transaction volume since 1996, meaning fewer properties are changing hands now than at any time in nearly 3 decades. Yet simultaneously, home values are hovering near historical peaks. We have fewer transactions occurring alongside higher asset prices. In a standard economic model, these two factors would neutralize one another. That is the fundamental principle of supply and demand. You learned this concept in grade school, and so did I. But here we find ourselves in this reality. The market is gridlocked, valuations are illogical, and the typical first-time buyer is now approaching 40 years of age. If you have attempted to purchase a residence recently, you already recognize that something is profoundly, structurally broken. You just cannot quite pinpoint the cause. My name is Pam, and today we are going to undertake something that the real estate sector, the mortgage industry, and the majority of financial news outlets would sincerely prefer you avoid. We are going to deconstruct exactly what occurred within this market, aligning every domino in sequence using the actual data, ensuring that when you make your next financial move, you are doing so with complete awareness. Hit subscribe if you want to keep analyzing the real math. Let us begin. The median existing home price currently sits around $422,000. Back in 2019, 7 years previous, it was $278,000. That represents a 51% increase. This is not happening in Manhattan or Palo Alto specifically. This is nationally the median, the exact center of the entire country. Mortgage rates are currently hovering around 6.6%, which might sound acceptable until you recall that in January of 2021, you could secure a 30-year fixed mortgage for 2.7%. That is an entirely different financial universe. Here is what that disparity signifies in actual currency. Take the same house. A $410,000 purchase price with 20% down. That creates a $328,000 mortgage. At 2.7%, your principal and interest payment is roughly $1,030. At today's 6.6% rate, that identical loan costs roughly $2,095 monthly. That is $765 extra every single month for 30 years. For the exact same property, the same dated carpet, the same school district rated a 6 out of 10 on a good afternoon, the same backyard the size of a generous parking space, and the structure itself now costs $150,000 more than it did 6 years prior. Consequently, you are paying more for the financing and more for the actual asset, both simultaneously. This situation is not the result of bad fortune. It is the output of a highly specific sequence of decisions and economic shocks that accumulated over 5 years, and once you comprehend the sequence, the current landscape ceases to feel like chaos and begins to feel like an almost unavoidable conclusion. The year is 2020. The world is essentially on fire, metaphorically speaking, and the Federal Reserve, in an act of emergency financial panic, cuts rates to near zero and begins purchasing $120 billion in bonds and mortgage-backed securities every single month. They were injecting capital into the financial system with the dedication of someone who started a bonfire and is now mildly concerned they used excessive accelerant. By January 2021, the 30-year fixed mortgage hit 2.7%, near the lowest rate Freddie Mac had recorded since 1971. Individuals who had been hesitating on the sidelines suddenly realized they could afford significantly more house for the same monthly outlay. So they purchased homes, and purchased even more. But that was only half the propellant. The pandemic rewired what Americans required from their living spaces. Suddenly, your apartment functioned as your office, gym, school, restaurant, and primary source of human contact. A 700-square-foot unit in a city that used to feel adequate suddenly felt like a sensory deprivation tank requiring a password. Remote work exploded from under 5% to nearly 20% almost overnight, and millions of people began asking a very reasonable question. If I can work from anywhere, why am I paying $2,900 a month to reside somewhere I do not genuinely enjoy? So they relocated. Manhattan shed over 210,000 households. San Francisco, Chicago, and Los Angeles each lost tens of thousands. All of them descended upon Austin, Phoenix, Boise, Nashville, and Tampa locations, with already limited inventory that suddenly faced a stampede of buyers armed with pre-approvals, pandemic-era savings, and a desperate need for a home office that was not also a closet. National home prices jumped 39% between March 2020 and March 2022. That is not over a decade. That is 2 years. Austin climbed 63%, Phoenix 60%, and Boise, Idaho was up 55%. At the peak, nearly 6,500 homes sold for $110,000 or more above the asking price in a single month for a standard house where someone intended to do normal things like cook dinner and debate whose turn it is to handle the trash. If you bought in 2020 or 2021, you likely made one of the best financial decisions of your life almost entirely by accident. That is not skill, that is timing. And for everyone not in a position to buy during that window, what transpired next made everything dramatically worse. By mid-2022, inflation was running at 9.2%, the highest in 4 decades. So the Fed did what central banks do. They raised rates with historic aggression, 11 hikes in 16 months, taking the base rate from 0.25% to 5.50%, the fastest tightening cycle in 40 years. Mortgage rates followed in the worst possible direction. January 2022 saw 3.3%. By October 2022, it was 7.1%. By October 2023, it hit 7.85%, the highest since the year 2000. On the very same houses people were paying $100,000 over asking for just 18 months earlier, at 7.85%. That $328,000 mortgage now costs roughly $2,370 a month, versus $1,330 at the pandemic low. That is over $1,000 more per month, and roughly $374,000 more over the life of the loan, for the exact same house. To purchase the median-priced home at today's 6.6% rate, you need to earn around $108,000 a year just to qualify. The median household income is $85,000. The average American family is $23,000 per year short of qualifying for the average house. And every single quarter-point rate increase prices roughly 1.4 million additional buyers out of the market entirely. It does not just mean fewer buyers, it means they are gone. Home sales fell from 6.2 million in 2021 to just over 4.1 million in 2025. Marking the slowest 3-year stretch the market has witnessed since the mid-90s. We are selling fewer homes today in a country with over 100 million more people than we sold in 1995. But here is the part that should break your brain. Prices did not fall. The median price back in 2024 hit $410,000, a record level we have essentially been stuck on ever since. Demand collapsed and supply collapsed at exactly the same time. That created something the modern housing market had never quite seen before, a total freeze. And to understand why, you need to understand the element quietly holding this entire market hostage. Right now, about 53% of all outstanding U.S. mortgages carry a rate below 4%. Roughly 22% carry a rate below 3%. If you bought in 2021 and locked in 2.75%, you are sitting on a financial instrument that no longer exists. The bank will not recreate it. The market cannot offer it. It is gone like a limited edition sneaker that sold out and never restocked. So if you sell your house and buy another one today, you're not just moving. You are voluntarily surrendering the cheapest money you will almost certainly ever access in your lifetime, and replacing it with money that costs more than twice as much. On a standard mortgage swap, that costs roughly $765 more per month. Every month. Forever. That is $91,800 over a decade. Just in interest, just for having the audacity to want to live somewhere different. Federal Reserve researchers put the average lock-in cost, the pure financial penalty of trading your old mortgage for a new one, at over $68,000. It costs $68,000 to leave, so the rational homeowner stays. They stay in the house that is too small, in the nursery that has become a Zoom background, in the neighborhood where they stopped knowing their neighbors 3 years ago, not because they want to stay, but because a spreadsheet is physically keeping them there. The Atlanta Fed found this effect reduces the probability that any homeowner lists their home by 22 to 24%. FHFA researchers estimated it has suppressed 1.8 million transactions that otherwise would have occurred. Active inventory is still 18% below 2019 levels. Months of supply hovers between 3.4 and 3.9. You need 6 for a balanced market. The market isn't broken in the sense that it is collapsing. It is broken in the sense that it has completely stopped moving, like a door that won't open or close, just stuck, vibrating slightly, going nowhere. And if you want to understand who is actually getting squeezed the hardest, we need to talk about someone specific. Let's call her Sarah. She is 32, works in healthcare administration in a normal mid-sized city, makes $76,000 a year above the national median, has no credit card debt, a 770 credit score, and $40,000 saved over 3 years of genuine sacrifice. She skipped vacations, drove no new car, and had one roommate longer than she wanted. By any reasonable standard, Sarah is exactly the person homeownership was designed for. Here is what the market offers her in return. The median home in her city is $390,000. With 10% down, her loan is $351,000. At 6.6%, her monthly principal and interest is $2,240. Add property taxes, insurance, and a maintenance reserve, and the total monthly cost hits roughly $3,090. Sarah takes home about $4,750 a month. Housing would consume 65% of it. She would have $1,660 left for food, transportation, health insurance, utilities, student loans, and the occasional reminder that she is a human being with a social life. She cannot afford this house, not because she is irresponsible, but because the income required to comfortably buy the median home in her market is $112,000, and she earns $76,000. The gap isn't a personal failing, it is structural, it is baked into the math. And there are millions of Sarah's financially solid people being told by every cultural signal around them that they should own a home by now, while being quietly excluded by numbers that never appear in those signals. Here's what that actual experience feels like. It doesn't feel like a crisis. It feels like opening Zillow for the 16th time this week and saving a house you know you cannot afford just to have somewhere to place the aspiration. It feels like watching your rent increase $160 in March and realizing your down payment timeline just extended by 3 months for a deposit you have been building for 3 years. It feels like going to your best friend's housewarming, genuinely happy for them, while involuntarily calculating what their monthly payment must be. It feels like being responsible by virtually every measure and still being systematically kept out of the thing your parents treated as a basic expectation of adulthood. First-time buyers now make up just 22% of all purchases, a record low in 45 years of tracking. The historical norm is 40%. The median age of a first-time buyer is now 39. In the early 1990s, it was 29. Buying at 39 instead of 29 costs roughly $160,000 in lost lifetime equity from the decade of appreciation miss. Baby boomers now constitute 41% of all buyers. Half of older boomers are buying entirely in cash. They sold a house they bought for $200,000 in 1998 that is now worth $700,000, pocketed the equity, and walked in with no mortgage dependency, while the 32-year-old is trying to win a bidding war with a pre-approval letter and modest savings. The downstream results: 85% of Gen Z aspiring homeowners are delaying at least one major life milestone because of housing. 30% are postponing having children. 19% are delaying marriage. 1 in 5 aspiring buyers and 23% of millennials have given up on homeownership entirely, not paused, given up. The median first-time buyer being 39 years old is not just a data point. It is the statistical fingerprint of a generation squeezed so hard and for so long that the defining marker of middle-class stability has been pushed from early adulthood into middle age. And every institution with a financial stake in you buying a home has a structural incentive to tell you right now is a great time to buy. None of them profit when you say no. Here is what almost never receives enough airtime. The shortage didn't start in 2020. It was assembled piece by piece over 15 years of underbuilding following 2008. The U.S. is short somewhere between 4 and 5 million housing units. After the financial crisis, builders pulled back severely. For the entire 2010s, housing starts averaged about 1 million per year against a historical baseline of 1.6 million. And what got built skewed heavily toward the upper end of the market, because that is where the margins exist. The starter home. Under 1,400 square feet, the traditional entry point for first-time buyers went from over 410,000 units a year in the 1970s to just 70,000 in 2020. That is an 80% decline. The house that was supposed to be the beginning of the wealth-building ladder for working Americans was essentially discontinued as a product. Then came the pandemic surge, then the rate spike, and now tariffs. Steel is up 50%. Aluminum up 50%, Canadian lumber up significantly combined, adding an estimated $11,000 to $18,000 to the cost of every new home. The supply chain looked at the situation and essentially said, "Cool problem, not our department." Builders are fighting back with incentives and rate buydowns to 4 and 5% or lower. That the hard truth is this: the supply problem took a decade to create. It will take at least a decade to meaningfully solve. There is no policy lever anyone can pull that builds 4 million homes in 2 years. At some point in every housing market conversation, someone asks, "Is this 2008? No, not even close." And the reasons it is different matter enormously. In 2006 and 2007, subprime mortgages made up 19 to 22% of all originations. Liar loans, interest-only products, negative amortization mortgages, these were mainstream products. The banking system was betting on home prices rising forever, using money borrowed against itself with zero margin for error. Today, subprime lending is roughly 3.5 to 4% of originations. The median credit score is 760, 55 points higher than in 2006. And here is the most important number. In 2009, 25% of all mortgaged properties were underwater. That is the condition that triggers mass defaults, forced sales, and a genuine price spiral. Today, just 2.1% are underwater. Homeowners are sitting on $36 trillion in collective equity. Foreclosures in 2024 totaled 175,000. In 2008, they hit 2.2 million. The 2008 crisis happened because banks lent money to people who couldn't repay it, based on home values they largely invented. Today, the problem is almost the inverse. The lending is sound, the borrowers are qualified, the equity is real, and you still cannot afford anything. That is technically progress, I suppose. This is not a fragile market. It is a frozen, structurally constrained, deeply expensive market. A crash at least creates buying opportunities. A frozen market that slowly grinds sideways mostly just continues to exist, absorbing more of people's income and waiting for time to do what policy cannot. The thing everyone is waiting for is a significant drop in mortgage rates. It would genuinely help. Most forecasts have rates ending this year between 5.8% and 6.2%. That is better, but a survey found 38% of homeowners need rates below 5% before they would even consider selling. That threshold isn't where we are headed this year. The lock-in effect fades naturally over time. People have kids, take new jobs, get divorced, retire. The share of mortgages below 4% has already dropped from its peak of 66% down to about 49% today. That slow release is the most realistic path to a more functional market, but slow is the operative word. This is a 5 to 10-year process. Now here is the twist almost nobody is discussing. A dramatic rate drop might not fix affordability. It could temporarily make it worse. Think about it. Millions of buyers are sitting on the sidelines right now. If rates drop to 5% quickly, that wave of pent-up demand floods back overnight. But supply doesn't recover overnight. The multi-million unit deficit took a decade to create. So what happens when massive demand hits insufficient supply? Prices spike. The dynamic that drove the 2020 to 2022 surge could partially repeat at a higher base level. The cure, if it arrives too fast, could temporarily make the disease worse before making it better. The most honest forecast is the boring one. A slow, multi-year correction where prices move roughly sideways while incomes gradually rise. No crash, no dramatic relief. Just time and grinding adjustment with a lot of difficult personal decisions in the middle. If you are in your late 20s or 30s right now, you are navigating the most dysfunctional housing market any generation has faced since World War II. Not the most dramatic 2008 was more dramatic, but more insidious, because this one doesn't feel like a crisis. It feels like a permanent new normal. And every institution with a financial stake in your decision has a structural incentive to tell you now is always a great time to buy. It isn't always. Your frustration is legitimate. The income required to buy the median home is $108,000. The median household income is $85,000. The system has a $23,000 gap baked in before you even show up. You are not failing at adulthood. The math is just broken. The decision to buy has to be based on your real numbers, not the market's narrative. If total monthly housing costs land below 28 to 30% of your gross income and you plan to stay at least 7 years, buying makes sense. If the math doesn't work at that threshold, it doesn't work. Stretching to 45% of income because your real estate agent says it's a great time doesn't make it a great time. It makes you a future statistic. Renting and investing the difference is a completely legitimate strategy that almost nobody with a financial incentive will suggest, because nobody earns a commission when you put money in an index fund. In a high-rate, high-price environment, the math can absolutely compete with or outperform buying an overpriced house. This is not a consolation prize. If you are buying, look seriously at new construction. Builder rate buydowns at 4.5 to 5% are real, and the median new home price is essentially at parity with existing homes, something that almost never happens. Just make sure the incentives aren't disguising an inflated base price. Run every number. The housing market you're dealing with is the product of 30 months of the cheapest money in American history, followed by the fastest rate hike cycle in 40 years, layered on top of a decade of underbuilding that left the country 4 million homes short. The people who need prices to fall are priced out of buying even if they do fall. The people who need to sell are financially trapped by the very low rates that made housing affordable 5 years ago. Everyone is stuck at opposite ends of the same problem for completely opposite reasons, and there is no product, no policy, no executive order, and no rate cut that fixes a structural imbalance this large in a single year. The era of buying any house at any price and assuming appreciation bails you out is over. Running the real numbers before you sign is not pessimism. It is the only sane way to navigate a market this expensive and this broken. You are not crazy for looking at listings and thinking, none of this adds up. It genuinely doesn't, and understanding exactly why it doesn't that is the first step toward making a decision that actually works for you, instead of just participating in collective financial insanity because everyone around you insists that buying is always the right move. Now you do. Drop a like if this helped. It genuinely makes a difference. Subscribe if you want to keep running the real math together.